Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. This is the first item on the agenda. I'm Joe Bortoloni, host of this meeting, but panel member David Clusio will be the chair. In addition to the panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Thank you, and David, please begin the meeting.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Joe, can you confirm that the meeting is being recorded?
It is.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
There are not, no.
And are there any conflicts with any panel members? I'll take it that silence is that agreement that there are no conflicts. Okay, the first agenda item on the agenda today is the review of 186 Hunter Street East. Lead planner on the file is Elena Baldessera. Good afternoon, Elena. We're ready for your presentation, and please keep the presentation under 10 minutes.
Great, thanks very much. So can everybody see my screen? Okay, I'll take silence as.
Yeah. Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elena Baldessera. I'm planner 1 on the urban team. I'm the planner who's reviewing the application for 186 Hunter Street East. An official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment has been received by the city, and the project is currently under review by staff for comments. The proposal is to demolish the existing structures and construct a 12-story multiple dwelling. Details about the proposal will be provided by the applicant. The yellow star shows the location of the site. The property is bounded by 3 roads: Hunter Street East to the north, Liberty Street, and Ferguson Avenue South. So these are just some area photos. This is looking north from the subject site to the opposite side of the road on Hunter Street East. This is looking west on Hunter Street East from the subject site. This is looking east on Hunter Street East to the subject site. And then this is looking north on Liberty. So the subject site would be on the east side or on the right side of this photo. And then this is looking north from Ferguson Avenue South, and the site would be on the left side of this photo. So the Urban Hamilton official plan, it's identified as neighborhoods on Schedule E, which is shown with the blue star on the slide. The designation is neighborhoods, again shown with the blue star on the subject site. So some of the major themes for the neighborhoods designation, the sites shall primarily consist of residential uses and complementary facilities to serve the residents. The existing character of established neighborhoods in designated areas shall be maintained, and residential intensification in these areas shall enhance and be compatible with the scale and character of the existing residential neighborhood. This would include use, form, transition, and character of the proposed development. It also asks to respect and maintain or enhance the streetscape patterns, so setbacks, building height, separations. So in terms of the urban design policies, similarly, the policies ask to respect the character, built form, and landscapes of the neighborhood, contribute to the ambiance, the streetscape, the amenity areas, and the pedestrian areas. Complement the existing character, color, and surrounding context, and create pedestrian-oriented places that are safe, accessible, connected, and easy for people to navigate. So the property is currently zoned community commercial C3, as shown by this yellow star on the slide. The permitted uses on community commercial zone are not limited to, but include a range of commercial uses as well as a mixed use building. So for a mixed-use building, the dwelling units are only permitted above the ground floor, with some common areas permitted at grade, but can only occupy 50% of that floor area. The maximum building height right now in the current zoning is 14 meters. So today, the areas of discussion that we would like to talk about is, does the proposal represent compatible integration with the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character? Does the proposal organize space in a logical manner through design, placement, construction of new buildings, streets, structures, and/or landscaping? And is the proposal massed to respect existing and planned street proportions? So that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Elena. I'll turn it over to the consultant to provide additional information. Again, please keep your presentation to under 10 minutes.
Alrighty, just let me get my screen up here. Alright, just give me a moment. Everyone see my screen all right?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay, so thank you everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Scott Beatty with Urban Solutions. I'm joined by my colleague Matt Johnston of Urban Solutions, Edward Thomas of SRM Architects, and Leanne Seeley of White House Urban Design. On behalf of Wellington Hamilton Nonprofit Housing, Inc. As discussed by Elena, an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application is required to facilitate the proposed development at 186 Hunter Street East. And taking a look at the subject lands, as previously mentioned, it is bordered by Hunter Street East to the north, Ferguson Avenue South to the west, and Liberty Street to the east. Currently, the lands are occupied by a vacant one-story commercial building. It is designated as neighborhoods, and specifically, the official plan amendment is required to permit a residential density of 595 units per hectare on the site. Similarly, a zoning bylaw amendment is required to rezone the subject lands from the community commercial C3 zone, of which it is currently in, to a site-specific E3 high-density multiple dwellings district in the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw number 6593. And I'm going to turn it over to Edward Thomas now to take you through the proposed site design.
Thank you, Scott. The plan that's in front of you now, you can see Hunter Street is top of page and north, and Liberty is to the east and Ferguson to the west. We're proposing at grade facing Hunter Street to have residential units that would have terraces and doorways facing to the street. That would be on the west side, those 4 units on the west side of the street, on the west side of the property. And then to the east, we have an amenity area that would be glazed in and with an outdoor space right adjacent to that, facing towards Liberty Street to the east. In the center would be the main entrance to the apartment building, directly off of Hunter Street. And to the south, or the furthest distance away from Hunter Street, we have our vehicle access. Off of Ferguson Street, we would have a underbuilding handicap parking and visitor stalls and and a ramp to the underground parking. From Liberty Street on the east, we would have vehicle garbage loading and drop-offs such as Uber and other facilities, and a ramp that goes up to the second level for parking on level 2. The units are, for the apartment building, begin at level 3 and go up to level 12. In the central area on this floor plan to the rear would be services and storage for bicycle parking unit, storage for the residents, garbage pickup, electrical services, etc. There's also a move-in room directly off the loading area, and that would have access to the rear doors of the elevator. You can go to the next slide, please, Scott.
Sure. And just before we go to the next slide, I just wanted to note as well, this proposed development is a 12-story multiple dwelling containing 104 rental dwelling units, of which a percentage will be affordable as defined by CMHC. And the total number of parking spaces provided is 50 through an underground parking garage and podium, as mentioned by Ed.
So I won't spend too much time. This is level 2, which allows for a single drive aisle, a double loaded parking with lockers for the residents to use. Next slide. This is the level 3, which has units, as we talked about, with some larger terraces facing to the south and a terrace to the east facing towards Liberty Street. When we get, maybe I'll just say it now, the building form is 12 stories high to the west, stepping down to 7 stories as we move to the east, and stepping down to 2 stories as we get to the very extreme eastern side. So what you see on your page now is the rooftop of level 2, which would have no built form from grid line 7 to grid line 9, above the second level. Next slide, please. This would be the transition in the floor plan at level 7, and we would have outdoor amenity space on the rooftop of level 7, and then the smaller tower footprint from levels 8 to 12. Next slide, please. These are the elevations. So in the upper left-hand corner, you have the elevation that would be facing Hunter Street, and Liberty Street would be to the left side, and it's 2 stories high, with the amenity space at grade, the entrance to the building and the entrance feature.
Scott, can you hide your banner there?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
And and then we have the ground floor units along Hunter going to the east. So we're going to the west to Ferguson Street. Then going back to the very left, you can see the stepping from 2 stories to 7 stories to 12 stories. On the top right-hand side is the elevation facing Liberty Street. And you can see there's the amenity at the bottom and the loading shipping area and the ramp up to the second floor. Down on the bottom left corner is the rear elevation, and there is a laneway that is not part of this property. It's a public laneway to the best of my knowledge, and there would be a 2-story podium at that level, and then the tower elements to the north of that podium. And then on the bottom right corner is the elevation facing to the east, where we have the residential units on the ground floor, and then we have open air parking and the drive aisle that allows us to get to the underground parking. And you can see here the stepping towards the laneway on the south end of the property. Next slide, please. This is a rendered elevation looking to the Ferguson side of the building. So here we're incorporating this the red brick that touring around the Corktown neighborhood and reviewing some of the historic photographs, we saw a lot of red bricks, some light industrial buildings. So we started to incorporate the structure of the industrial buildings that to some extent still exist, but did exist in the neighborhood, and then transitioning into a yellow brick apartment building on top, incorporating some of the yellow brick that also exists in the neighborhood. Here you can see the ground floor units that would be at the base, the parking level, and the treatment that we're using for the elevational in front of the parking area, and then the rooftop units, rooftop terraces, sorry, and the balconies on the units as we go up. Next slide, please. This is an elevation showing the stepping that would be facing this, looking to the northwest. So this is the southeast corner of the building. Next slide, please. There's a close-up of the entrance feature and the amenity feature, the landscaping, and the bike lane that exists on Hunter Street now. Next slide. This is looking to the southeast, the northwest corner. It's Hunter Street is on along the bottom, and Ferguson is on the right-hand side of the page. And you can see the scale from the single-family neighborhoods, and just off this page to the right is a 20-story existing apartment building. Next slide, please. This is from looking from the residential neighborhood towards the southwest, and the parking deck and the stepping that occurs from the laneway to the south as we transition the mass towards the 12-story building. Next slide, please. There's some angular planes that are shown on the right-hand side for everyone's information, and some of the downtown urban growth center mapping. And Scott, I'll turn it back to you now.
Yeah, so just to quickly touch on this again, as you can see, the site directly abuts the downtown urban growth center in the downtown Hamilton secondary plan. And as you can see in the surrounding neighborhoods that are in close proximity to that same area, you have many examples of taller 10+ story buildings in the area. I'll pass it over to Leanne Seeley now to quickly touch on the site circulation.
Yeah, we're getting to the end of your 10 minutes, so make it pretty brief.
Okay. Sorry, Leanne, are you available?
Yep, sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks, everyone. I understand we're getting close to time. I just have a couple of slides here. This one here speaks to circulation and connectivity. As we heard earlier, the official plan encourages new development to provide the compatible intensification that supports public transit and activates the public realm, provides safe, intuitive pedestrian connections. And this proposal accomplishes these with direct connections to the existing pedestrian network and nearby transit. The layout also keeps parking out of sight with access to it off Liberty and Ferguson. The ground floor patios animate the streetscape, and the main entrance, as you can see, is directly off Hunter, with secondary ones off Liberty and Ferguson. And bike parking is also easily accessible. It's off Ferguson. Next slide, please. Enhancing the streetscape. Along Hunter and Liberty and Ferguson, the streetscape is enhanced with the design of street trees and landscape strips, grassline boulevards, and sidewalk connections to the surrounding context. And the patios that are at grade are edged with ornamental fencing and evergreen shrubs for visual interest and visibility to the street. They provide year-round interest as well for the passerby. That's it for me. Thank you.
And we can conclude our presentation there if, yeah, the committee is looking to start getting into the question period.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'll turn it over to the panel members to seek clarification on any points. And the first panel member is Jana.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, there is a slide showing the angular planes, but they are, in my opinion, it looks like they're fairly ignored. So I just wanted to get some clarity on that.
So yeah, we are on Hunter Street East, which is a collector road. And like I said, we are in close proximity to that downtown secondary plan. So as you can see, the low-rise dwellings, which are abutting the site to the east, they have that angular plane. There's not one shown here, but they do have that step down informed by that angular plane to have respect for the transition to those lower uses. And while that angular plane is not achieved on the west side, as mentioned by Edward, that is where a 20-story multiple dwelling currently exists. So there's a little less priority placed on that. I do recognize that on Hunter Street East, you see that line does cut through the taller 12-story portion of the building. However, the step down on the easterly side does fall within that. Essentially, one of the challenges of this site was the constraints of the site in terms of its size. And we did our best to try and implement transition that best efficiently provides some affordable housing units while also respecting the surrounding low-rise character.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions, Jana?
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay. Hoda?
Hi, thank you for presentation. I had a question about top of patio on south side and east side, where you have the private terraces on the south side. The rest of the top of the patio, it is going to remain just empty, or is there any plan for that?
I'll let Edward speak to this one.
We're we're in consultation with the ownership group about how that could be used, but our intent would be at a minimum a green roof, so that'd be a pleasant overlook from the units above, and that the what we're discussing is the size of the terraces and what would be appropriate for those units, and from a pricing point of view and looking at the supportive housing aspect and where we want those units to be.
Okay, and the other question is about the ground level units who has a kind of terrace toward north, toward Hunter Street. Those are closed terraces. Is there any access to go outside, or you just saw that as closed terraces?
Yeah, we would provide doors from the units out onto those terraces. We find that we get a lot of different opinions depending on the demographics and the neighborhood, whether people want that from a security point of view or not. I mean, I'll just say personally, I think it's great for people to be able to just walk out of their unit onto a terrace. And then, as we saw with the landscaping plan, we are also planning to enhance the along Hunter Street and along Liberty Street with landscaping, and using landscaping as well as some built form to create privacy for those terraces.
Okay, thank you. That's it from me.
Joey?
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone for the presentation. My question is maybe aligning with Jana's question about the angular plane. The east side clearly steers clear of the limits of the angular plane, but the west side doesn't, as mentioned, it doesn't quite meet it. Is there a consideration for redistribution of the massing so that it could potentially achieve it throughout the site?
Again, yeah, like I was saying earlier, that's definitely one of the challenges of the site is the size constraints and how best to provide units while also respecting transition in the particular interfaces along the borders of the site. So while it is recognized that the west portion of the site likely has what you would call the worst angular plane or least compliant angular plane. The consideration was that on that particular northwest corner, you had that 20-story multiple dwelling to the left. You had another apartment building kitty corner to that intersection. And then directly across the street is a 1 or 2-story commercial building. So we felt that if there was to be one part of the site to place less emphasis on in terms of the angular plane, it would be there given the surrounding context, whereas more focus was placed on the south border of low-rise single detached dwellings, similarly to the east.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Dana. Dana, it's not on the screen. So I guess
Sorry,
Jennifer.
Dana wasn't able to make it.
Okay, Jennifer Sison.
Thanks, David. And thank you for your presentations. I had a couple of questions. I was wondering if you could speak about the decision not to, or to have an above grade parking level, and if those spaces could be located in a second underground story.
Ed, I'll let you speak to this one.
Sure. This one's my favorite topic, actually, is where are we going to go with cars? And I guess I try to promote to my clients to provide above grade parking that can be converted to space later in a world where we have driverless vehicles. So to answer your question, yes, we can essentially build a waterproof basement 2 stories down and take the parking down there, and that space that we see now that we're providing for vehicles on the second floor could be provided underground. It'd be more expensive, which would impact the affordable housing aspect of the project. But I feel quite strongly that the development of where the car industry is going to go in terms of subscribership, etc., that then a space like this would allow for that second floor to be converted in the future to more habitable spaces, whether that's more residential units, amenity space, or commercial uses.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Related to that, what % of the units are going to be affordable?
That is still being determined with the client. Ultimately, it will be dependent on sort of the needs once it's being brought to market, and sort of do an analysis on the affordable housing needs at that time and what makes most sense on their front. But it will definitely be an important discussion to have in the future.
Thanks, Scott. And was at-grade commercial or retail space considered?
For this particular site, I don't believe it was from the get-go. It was more so discussed as a residential opportunity, specifically with regard to affordable housing. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion around the opportunity for providing retail at the base of the development.
Thank you. And final question, what's the intended use for the outdoor amenity space on the 7th floor? I didn't see any detail about that.
Ed, would you like to speak to this one?
There hasn't been any detailed plans for that particular use. It would be for all the residents of the building, and it would be an outdoor space, mostly for the outdoor activities, gentle activities, I guess I would say, seating and so on. But there has been no discussion in depth about what kind of program would be used in the space, other than it's outdoor for all the residents.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
The other Jennifer Mallard. Not seeing Jennifer Mallard right now.
No, I'm here. I was just unmuted. I'm back now. Thanks, David. Question about sustainability. You're asking for an official plan amendment and considerable change to the current zoning, and wondering at what mechanisms are there to give back. Affordable housing, you know, is great initiative, but what about sustainability, and are there any goals currently in the plan for this building?
Certainly we can talk with the client to explore the kind of low impact development options on site that can be explored during the development of the project. I do know currently the site is a contaminated site that will require remediation. So given that, I think at its base level, it is adding what is a brownfield currently into a new residential space that is transforming an underutilized site in the city. And additionally, I think there is something to be said too for adding the kind of density we're adding in terms of energy efficiency and efficiency of services being provided to those residents. A lot of times, you know, you'll have a site like this that a low rise, maybe a townhouse development or something like that would go in there. Doesn't fully capture the potential efficiencies of the site from a servicing and energy perspective. I welcome either Ed or Leanne if they wanted to add on anything to that.
I'll speak to, with the design of the building, we're assuming a structural system that is a ICF Nadura 35, which is a R35 insulated concrete panel system. It's insulated concrete form with a brick exterior. We also purposely tried not to have an excessive amount of glass. We tried to have a lot of wall space that would be pure continuous insulation, which you get with the ICF structural system, as well as we've been in conversation with the owner's mechanical contractor, electrical contractor, contractors that we assume will be the general contractor, and major trades, to talk about the costing of heat pumps and or non-gas fired appliances and to run the building. But our general, at this early stage, what we tried to do was to not add a lot of unnecessary glass to the building, and to do the initial structural analysis, assuming the R35 continuous insulation ICF system.
To add to that as well, just throw in that the decision to have 50 parking spaces provided and then 56 bicycle parking spaces provided within this development was also a decision to try and push the more multimodal transportation side of things for this development, and not place such a reliance on cars for those future residents. So I think that too helps contribute to mitigating climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can just jump in quickly and say, Scott, I was going to mention that because the building is well positioned for access to transit as well, which really speaks to that multimodal transportation for sustainability. And then just a quick note about, Ed already mentioned the potential for the green roof and the amenity space on the rooftop that's not yet completely designed or programmed, but it will of course have soft surface components as well as walkable surfaces for the residents, but that will also contribute to some sustainability goals for the site.
Thank you. No further questions.
Eldon is, yes, Eldon.
Thank you for your presentation. Couple questions. I was actually very intrigued about, I guess, your future-proofing proposal to convert the above-story parking into units in the future. That was going to be one of my questions about how does that work with your residential below when you have this parking above. But that's a very interesting solution. So appreciate that clarification. Also appreciate the clarification about the spill outdoor amenity space adjacent to the indoor at the ground level. It wasn't clear when I looked at the plan that existed there. My questions relate to a couple of things. First is on the Liberty Street side of the plan, it looks as if part of your internal loading area is exposed. Is there any screening there, or is it kind of open air at the first level?
I'll speak to a couple of those, and then I'll let Leanne speak to the landscaping along Liberty that's adjacent to the amenity space. Currently, the garbage loading area is not screened. It is open air. We're also in early discussions about where the transformer would be on the site where we bring in power. And that's also where I'm assuming that it will come in, is off of Liberty Street in that general location. With respect to the second floor parking area, we can easily accommodate units. It could easily be renovated to accommodate units along Hunter Street and maybe along Liberty and Ferguson, but the depth of the podium is deeper than you would want for residential uses. So it would likely be converted to residential uses and something else. So often it tends to be more amenity space, or as I said previously, part of it could become commercial space if there was a demand for office space. It could even be workspaces for the residents in the building. What I envision, and when I designed these spaces, is that certainly all along Hunter Street, that second floor would become residential spaces, and the structural grid and the systems that we have in place would easily accommodate that from the third floor above to the second floor below to allow for plumbing and mechanical issues. The rest of the space, it's kind of wide open and would depend on what the parking demands are, say 10 years from now, and what the demand for other spaces are. So there could be a wholesale change. You could take those units on the ground floor and that might become commercial retail and move the units up to the second floor, for example. But I personally believe this quite strongly, that by having that parking on the second level, we create a podium for the tower, which helps in the transition and the massing, as well as something that I think is going to be temporary, which is our parking demands today versus what our parking demands are going to be a decade or two from now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I wasn't so much fussed about the podium and the parking, but I appreciate that. I was just acknowledging that I thought it was an interesting approach. Question as it relates to some of the parking at, I guess, looking at this plan, kind of this plan north, looking kind of southwest, you have barrier-free parking spaces underneath the podium and some parking spaces, which I had assumed was, drop-off pickup. But then as well, you've also shown this lay-by on Ferguson Avenue. And I guess I've heard the discussion about, the future we don't see, we see the future as driverless. Is that parking that you're showing under the podium necessary? Can you, or is there an opportunity to be able to rethink that space?
I'm going to have to draw attention to our time, so I'm hoping a brief answer can be achieved.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. It could be. At the moment, we thought it was appropriate to have some barrier-free parking at grade, easy access to then come in essentially a back door into that hallway to get to the elevator. And there's a lot of space there that we're also allowing for short-term bike parking and so on. But all that space could be easily converted into other uses or whatever the demands are. It would be quite easily accommodated in the future. At present, we think this is probably how it would best be used.
Okay, thank you. All my other questions were really small, so I'm going to forego them on the sake of time.
Thanks, Eldon. I think we'll turn it over to Jana for the feedback.
Thank you. And thank you for proposing affordable housing. I think it's important and very desirable. I think that the project has some really good features, such as the affordability, potential sustainability features, the stepping back on one of the sides, but generally it doesn't make much, doesn't take too much into consideration its surroundings, specifically the single detached homes. For example, the angular planes we've talked about being ignored, and there is no real transition to the surrounding singles, or at least an attempt to create some positive relationships. I know you say it's two-story, but it's basically a three-level blank wall of the parking podium right against the small single detached dwellings. I would strongly suggest eliminating the parking in the podium. The design of these facades with the patterns of very large blank walls is really not empathetic to the surroundings. I very often hear the argument that in the above ground structures, the parking can be later eliminated and the spaces would be reused for additional units. And I would really like if we were not predicting what will happen to the personal vehicle ownership and when it will happen. In my opinion, if you do want to have residential units lining that structure, they should be designed as such now. I admire buildings which are adaptable. I think that's how we should design them. But that's not always simple when the podiums are very deep, for example, and wouldn't offer enough daylight for their deep floor plates for residential or office uses. So maybe it could work for certain depths along the streets, but it still would be preferred, in my opinion, not to design a parking structure in the podium along the streets. I really like the step back. I think it's a great gesture. I very much appreciate that. And maybe the rest of the building could also be designed in a way that it reads more as a composition of smaller elements to better fit into that neighborhood. There are some parts of the tower which are they read like a fairly large slab. The narrow ends of the tower seem to be very bare, even though they both face public streets and are very visible. So one is, I think, completely blank. The other has 2 rows of narrow windows. So I think that the location of these facades grants them a better, more detailed treatment. And I agree, I think you were mentioning before that the ground floor units, that the connection to the street would be really nice. So I would really suggest that if there couldn't be any retail or other uses planned at this stage, that a better interface with the street would be through those connections to these residential units. And it would integrate this development better with the surrounding neighborhood. I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Hoda.
Me too. I echo comments of my colleague Yana about the ground level units to be like retail. I believe in such a neighborhood. Okay, I understand the Hunter, it's a kind of main street, and but there are lots of single family units in the neighborhood. And the best way to let such a high-rise affordable housing to be accepted in the neighborhood is to having some retails that brings everyone to this building and makes sense that, okay, we are losing some points, some good points of the neighborhood, but we are gaining other features. And also having those as a retail would add some value and give some opportunity, probably have more landscaping in that side. I know the property line, it's so close, but I would like really to see more landscaping at Hunter Street, as well as south side when there is access to underground and overground parking. When there is a alleyway on backside, I believe it's nice to have a green buffer between that alley that gives access to the residents back there and divide it from the parking garage. Those are my comments, and again, I thank you for your effort to create this building. Thank you.
Joey?
Thanks, David. Just for clarity, is the panel reviewing an affordable housing project, or is it a mix of affordable and market?
A mix of affordable and market.
Okay, because we were under the impression, and the summary sheet said it was 104 affordable housing residential units, and that's every unit in the building. So is there a percentage of market versus affordable?
Yeah, that percentage hasn't been determined yet. It's planned to be determined down the line, closer to when it is being brought to market, so that it can respond to the market accordingly. So yeah, the short answer is no, there is no exact percentage yet. But any of those units that are market will be rental. They aren't going to be condominiumized.
Okay, so there's a chance that this could be a full building for the market and not affordable at all. Is that right? If you find it unfeasible down the line to not insert affordable housing, will you not do that?
No, my impression is that's definitely not in the cards, that there'll be none. It's just a question of what the percentage is, but certainly it is at its base an affordable housing project.
Okay, sorry, I don't mean to ask additional questions and delay it. I mean, I think it's important that the panel understands, because we're under the impression that this is fully affordable, a building that has affordable units 100%. And these are things that we take into consideration, especially when you're asking for 3 times the density on the property and also 3 times the height on the tower side. So I think I think that should be, maybe it's a bit too late now because we sort of already have our thoughts fully formed, but I think that, when these projects come to us, we should have an understanding of what percentage is affordable and what is market. Okay, that said, I reviewed the scoped HIA and agree with the findings of the heritage consultant. At the end, there was recommendations on items to salvage. They're including electrical components, steel, concrete, brick, metal siding, windows, and doors. I'm going to recommend to staff that a full documentation and salvage report be developed for this project, and understanding what percentages of these materials will be reused and salvaged. It's great that brick is being considered, especially that this is that this building is going to be a full brick building. Is that true? Is it going to be fully brick from top to bottom? That's quite an expense. Would that be feasible?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Yeah, we do a lot of, in our office, we do a lot of ICF buildings with a brick veneer, and it costs out quite well.
Okay, so it's a brick veneer building, not full brick. Well, maybe there's an opportunity, and I like the idea that you're referring to the qualities and the characteristics of the Corktown neighborhood, and that it's full of red brick, and that you're aligning with that. Maybe there's an opportunity here to salvage. I believe the existing building has red brick, to salvage that brick and to reuse it, maybe in the lower parts of the building that are closely connected to grade and to the public realm. I think the benefits of this project is that it's on the north end of Corktown, so it's in terms of the characteristics and massing and building typology of Corktown, it's very different than the neighborhood. But the north end is a little bit different, and those characteristics are less intact. So I think the project, for what it's proposing, it benefits from that. And also being on the north end, shadows project into that more intermittent area rather than in the residential area proper. Overall, I think, and I appreciate the distribution of massing. I still think the 12-story side is maybe a bit too tall. And also, I think that the Fergus Avenue face has a very hard edge. And from the sidewalk, it goes straight up to 12 stories. And I'm wondering if there's a way to bring a little bit of variation to that. What the presentation lacked was contextual section. I know the perspective showed context, but the perspective can many times be misleading. If we had seen a section of the adjacent tower and its relationship to the 12-story piece, I think we would have realized that that is maybe not the most ideal condition on that part of the street, and that the towers are very close to each other. So I think maybe there's some consideration that can be brought to that. Thank you again for your presentation.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you all. So I want to start with the public realm. I do really appreciate that you provided some urban braille for the street naming and the sidewalk paving, and the level of detail that was shown in the ground floor landscape plans was great. I do think, however, more could be done to help enliven the street level on all three frontages, particularly as you're getting towards the south end of the site, which is predominantly for vehicles and parking. To echo both Yana and Hoda, I think you should still consider having unit access from Hunter Street, even with the security issues that you'd noted. I think you should explore it at least. And some additional plantings along Liberty and Hunter Street could also help to frame the indoor amenity space. I am happy to hear you've considered a green roof on the 3rd story, but I'd have appreciated more detail on that and the 7th story amenity space as well, as these seem to have really good programming intentions, but nothing's really shown yet. I also have concerns with the covered bike and car parking spots leading to underground parking, as well as the garbage and loading area. The these spaces, as well as the lack of active uses on this side of the building, can create some potential safety concerns there. I would really encourage you to consider maybe moving a second podium to open that area up to the sky to help improve sightlines and also potentially help with the transitioning to all of the residential uses just south of there. Removal of the ramp here could also help to provide room for an outdoor amenity space and buffer the residences to the south. In terms of built form, while I think the height of the building could be justified at the corner of Ferguson and Hunter with the surrounding context, if you were to offer something in return, such as more improvements to the public realm and all of the sustainability and having a majority of the units being affordable, as you've kind of alluded to, it's still quite tall, and without all of those elements in being brought in, I don't see it justified for what we're seeing right now. I do appreciate that you've shown some transition to Liberty Street using that 45-degree angular plane, but as I've mentioned, there's not really a good transition to the residents to the south, and the massing doesn't really work for the context, as Joey's already touched on. I think the reduction in parking to me is reasonable. An existing alleyway on the south side, some reduction in the rear yard setback that you've asked for would be permissible. I find that reducing it from 7.5 meters to 1 meter is just too much, and that further step backs, or some form of buffering is required to transition. Overall, I do look forward to seeing the final design with all of the positive elements that others have already touched on, and thank you for your presentations.
Jennifer Mallard.
Thank you. I agree with many of the comments stated before, but I'll start with echoing Joey's concern about affordable housing. And we really do look at these submissions in a different light if there's a commitment to giving back to affordable housing. So it would be really disappointing if the percentage of affordable housing came out at 5% or 1% in the end, because I think 100% is what we interpreted in the documentation, and I think reading it at that, and that's a goal that I would want to see. I agree with my colleagues' comments on parking reduction, and if the above grade parking was just deleted at this point, and then the whole building could come down in height, I think that's a reasonable solution. Of course, that's a much greater relaxation in the zoning bylaw, but I think it's a good trade-off. Materiality wise, I appreciate your pulling from the industrial aesthetic with the strong slab and column expression at the podium. I think the color contrast there is just a little bit too much. It might be more subtle, more subtle color change might be a strategy that could be applied to the rest of the building, because I think there are many pattern textures used here, and distilling it down might be a better approach in the end. There are some strong L-shaped caps that are in black on the elevations, and I think if a canopy language pulled from the industrial aesthetic, I think that might be just a nice avenue to sort of clean up the aesthetics of the project. But great effort and great initiative to improving this site and improving the provision of affordable housing in Hamilton. Thank you.
Eldon.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the explanation about a lot of the components of the proposal. I agree with a lot of my colleagues' comments on the proposal. I'm not gonna repeat a lot of the components they said. The only items I will note, and I'll ask you to do think about is, and the one comment I did mention was, please consider the loading arrangement on the east side and how that's screened from the public realm, and give a little bit more attention to that. I think the way it's currently set out gives an opportunity for the back of house to effectively be an open air view. And I think that there's plenty of space to be able to at least do a greater mitigation of that space. And I know I said I'm going to repeat comments, but just building on both what Yana and what Jennifer noted as it relates to Hunter Street and individual accesses, just even looking on the plan, you can't really tell how alignment of doors versus softscape versus hardscape versus is that a walkway, is that not a walkway, how that reads from a, I guess, from a ground plan perspective. Um, I think some greater thought should be given to how that functions and how that is an extension of that space, if it is an extension of that space, and whether the room that you provided is sufficient space to be able to allow for an extension menu space. And recognizing that you do have a limited amount of menu space, this is one of the few areas where you can expand on those opportunities. I think those are really the points that I just wanted to share. And just the last point was that I did appreciate the indication of the interest of the green roof. And I agree with Jennifer's comment that it's something that I think would be, it would have been helpful to see that earlier. But I think it's something that would really benefit on this project. And I think you should give real consideration because that's quite a large surface for it just to be, albeit a roof or any other roof type system. I think there's a huge opportunity to be able to do something from a softscape perspective at that upper level. Thanks for your presentation. Those are my comments.
Okay, so just in conclusion, I'll be relatively brief. I think I would summarize my comments as for the most part in agreement with my colleagues on the panel. I think that it would be worth re-examining the above grade parking. I think that there's certain, I found the possibility of future transformation kind of intriguing, but when I look at the penalties on the site planning, particularly on the ground and having an extra, all the area that's devoted to the ramp and whatnot, I think that it's a kind of speculative aspect. And in the meantime, there's a lot of compromises that are forced on the plan and the building height and its massing that would be addressed or would be partially solved by reducing that or eliminating that component. I wonder about the alleyway, the laneway, if that can't be used as, whether you have a right of use of that and whether it can't double as a method for reducing the overall asphalt and hard surface of your composition, and combined with the deletion of the ramp to above, that you would have more ground plane to work into an amenity area. I think also there are a few decisions in the planning that I can't help but wonder if, for example, as you go up the building, having the elevator core where it is and ends up being an exposed surface on the east side, if it was embedded to the west further, that could be a corner unit. And that might contribute to a little bit more interest on the end elevation on the outside and also just make a bit more amenity on that. Similarly, the corridors on the west side, they end in a blank wall. I'm wondering if that couldn't be opened up and you would be able to get natural light into the public areas of the building, circulation and views on that, and also help to address a facade that has some challenges, looks very sort of 70s kind of typical thing. I know that there is some desire to achieve a sustainable and high energy envelope, but I think that maybe there is some need to have an overall coherence to the composition of the building. Right now it does feel like it's made up of three separate components, and I think the large tower, a buff brick, isn't really looking like it's part of the overall composition, and I think it could be somehow integrated maybe in some of the ways that Jennifer was talking about. On the upper levels, I can't help but wonder whether the amenity area, some of the indoor amenity area, shouldn't be positioned adjacent to the outdoor amenity area on the upper levels. In that way, as a kind of combination, it would be more functional, and you'd have a program that would play off of each other. You comment about long-term flexibility of the buildings, and it's not quite clear in terms of this construction system whether some of your party walls between units, if they're entirely concrete, or if they have knockout panels, so that in the future flexibility would allow for units to be modified to become larger than just the building units as you have. So that's another alternative strategy. I know in City of Toronto they're requiring that. I don't know if that's embedded in the plan or not. In general, I have to say that I do agree with the massing stepping down and some of the strategies that you have, and of course with the essentially the program that you're pursuing. I have to assume, given the client is a nonprofit group, that a high percentage of the units will be aiming for that clientele, and so I'm hoping that, as others have stated, that that's a fair assumption, and that project is supporting that. So in general, I feel like you have a project here, and there's a lot of commendable things about it, and I think with some modifications, it'd be, as described by myself in the panels, it would be good to see some success and intensification on the site. We have another adventure to embark on in a few minutes, so I'm going to wrap up there. Do you have any questions of us before we head off?
Personally, I did not have any questions. I thought all those comments were good comments and good feedback on this, and definitely all things that I've written down and will take back to the ownership to discuss how we can improve it based on those comments. So thank you for your time, and unless Ed and Leanne have any other questions, I'll let you guys go.
No questions to me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments.
None from me either. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes. Good luck with your project.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.